Welcome to Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast.
Great to be here.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a really dramatic, true story from World War II. It's quite devastating, actually. It didn't happen on some, far-off battlefield. It happened right there, right at the heart of Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, that's right. We're going back to May 1944.
Oh.
And you need to picture the West Loch area of Pearl Harbor just buzzing, absolutely filled with activity.
Okay.
You've got these landing ships, tank, the big LSTs, and, other amphibious assault ships just crammed together, a real iron armada, like you said.
Wow.
And they were all loading up, getting ready for Operation Forager. That was the massive American push to take the Mariana Islands from the Japanese.
It's almost difficult to really visualize the scale, isn't it?
It really is.
We're talking about 29 of these huge ships, basically tied up side by side.
Basically touching, yeah.
And they weren't just carrying their own fuel and ammo. They were packed to the brim with everything the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions needed.
Everything. Think mountains of munitions, rows of trucks, tanks, all kinds of gear.
And fuel.
And even barrels of high-octane gasoline sitting right there on the open deck, for rapid deployment once they landed.
Right on deck, okay.
And these ships, they were full of people. Young Navy sailors, Coast Guardsmen, Marines, the guys loading, driving, fixing things.
Yeah.
A lot of them were pretty new, relatively inexperienced. It was, a sign of how quickly everything expanded during the war.
Makes sense.
And here's an interesting detail. A lot of the senior officers, the really experienced crew members, they were actually ashore that Sunday.
Really? Why?
They just finished a week of intense training exercises, so it was supposed to be some well-earned shore leave.
Ah, okay. So you've got this incredibly concentrated area, vital for a huge upcoming operation, packed with ships, fuel, ammunition, and a lot of relatively green personnel with fewer experienced hands on deck at that moment.
Exactly. A recipe for potential problems, looking back.
So our story today really unpacks what happened on what seemed like just another Sunday afternoon. But it suddenly exploded, literally, turned into this terrifying disaster.
A disaster that was kept quiet, really hidden from the public for decades.
Right. So get ready, folks. We're going to dive into the explosions, the bravery, and this sort of forgotten piece of Pearl Harbor's history.
Okay, so the day is Sunday, May 21st, 1944. The quiet is just shattered at 3:08 p.m.
3:08 p.m.
The LST 353, which was moored at Terror Pier 8, just erupts. A massive, colossal fireball.
And this wasn't just like a small bang.
Oh, no. This was huge. An explosion so powerful it was actually heard miles away, over at Pearl Harbor headquarters.
Wow. And you mentioned a fascinating detail about Admiral Nimitz.
Yes. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the top commander for the entire Pacific Fleet, he was actually at his residence, had guests over Una and Sandy Walker.
Okay.
They'd just finished dinner, apparently, and were planning a little cruise around the harbor.
Nice afternoon plan.
Yeah, but that plan went out the window the second that blast hit. Una Walker later wrote that their outing was immediately canceled because of the LST tragedy.
Imagine that. Being right there at the command center as chaos erupts just across the water.
Talk about being close to the action, even unexpectedly.
So that first explosion, it wasn't the end of it.
Not by a long shot. That was just the trigger. It set off a series of even more violent blasts. It must have been terrifying.
I can only imagine. Smoke, debris.
Debris flying everywhere. And this awful realization that it wasn't just one ship. People immediately started fearing, was it another Japanese attack? Or maybe even an earthquake.
Level of power.
Exactly. Burning wreckage started raining down onto the decks of the ships, tied up right next to the 353, igniting all that fuel, all those munitions we talked about. Within minutes, something like 200 men were just blown straight into the water. Even buildings on the shore started taking damage.
Chaos. You can almost hear the shouts, the explosions rolling across the loch, the fight for survival.
Absolute chaos. And the heat, the sheer intensity of the fire made it incredibly difficult for the crews to even start fighting it.
Right. What could they do?
Well, some ships that were a bit further away did manage to get damage control parties euthanized, but for those LSTs right there at Terra 8, several of them just started sinking fast.
So some are sinking, fires are raging.
And it gets worse. Some of the LSTs, amidst all this, managed to break their mooring lines and start moving.
To get away.
Some did, yeah.
Yeah.
Either using their own power or getting help from incredibly brave tugboat crews who raced in. But others Others were abandoned, burning, and started to drift.
Drifting infernos.
Exactly, floating bombs, basically, spreading the fire further across West Loch, and all the oil leaking from the damaged ships caught fire on the water itself.
Rivers of fire.
Yeah, carrying the flames towards piers that hadn't even been touched initially. Piers 7 and 9, right next to Pier 8, were suddenly in serious danger.
But you mentioned tugboats. There were acts of heroism happening, too.
Absolutely. Amidst this terrifying scene, you had harbor tugs, salvage ships, just charging toward the smoke and flames. They were battling these spreading fires, trying to contain it.
Incredible bravery.
And get this one tugboat crew, they saw a drifting LST completely ablaze, heading straight for another ship.
Which ship?
A fully loaded ammunition ship docked nearby.
Oh, my God.
Can you imagine? But this tugboat crew, they managed to get a line on the braining LST and steer it away. Just moments from an even bigger catastrophe.
That's unbelievable courage, a real knife-edge moment.
It really highlights how much worse it could have become. The whole area remained incredibly dangerous for hours.
It wasn't over quickly then.
No, not at all. Then, around 10:30 p.m. that night, there was one final huge explosion that rocked West Loch again.
Hours later.
Hours later. And some of those LSTs, it continued to burn for a full 24 hours after the first blast.
A whole day.
A whole day. And even the boats trying to fight the fire, the tugs and salvage craft, some of them got damaged in the process, too. It was just relentless.
So the immediate aftermath must have been just confusion and devastation. What about the casualties?
Well, that's where things get a bit murky. The initial official reports, they really downplayed the human cost, said relatively few casualties.
But that wasn't the reality.
No. The true toll was much, much higher. Most reliable sources now agree on 163 deaths and 396 injuries.
Staggering.
It is. But some researchers think the death toll might actually be even higher.
Why the uncertainty?
It seems there are inconsistencies in how Marine and Army casualties were recorded compared to Navy casualties. It just underscores the sheer chaos of the whole event. Records weren't the top priority right then.
Understandable, I suppose, in that situation. So naturally, there was an investigation.
Oh, yes. Very quickly, a Naval Board of Inquiry was convened to figure out what on earth happened.
Did they consider enemy action again? Sabotage?
They did look at the possibility of a Japanese submarine attack again, but like before, it was pretty quickly ruled out. The depth of West Loch, the anti-submarine nets, it just wasn't feasible.
Okay, so if not enemy action, what did they focus on?
They zeroed in on what was happening right before that first big explosion on LST-353. And testimony brought out a really crucial detail.
Which was?
Just moments before the fireball, Army stevedores were on the deck of the LST, unloading mortar ammunition.
Unloading onto the LST.
From where?
From a smaller landing craft, an LCT, tied alongside. Apparently, there were concerns about the firing accuracy of the mortars if they were launched from the smaller craft, so they were transferring the ammo.
That sounds unusual and maybe risky.
Extremely risky, as it turned out. And here's the really concerning part.
Yeah.
The inquiry found that the Army unit handling these mortar rounds, they reportedly had received zero specific training for handling this kind of ordnance.
No training for mortar rounds.
None specific to that task. And to make matters even worse, there were about 80 drums of highly flammable gasoline stored just 15 feet away from where they were working with the ammo.
15 feet. Gasoline drums next to untrained personnel moving mortar shells.
Precisely. It's hard to believe. So what did the board conclude was the cause?
They concluded that, yes, a mortar round exploding on the deck of LST-353 was the trigger for the whole disaster. That initial blast ignited everything else.
But could they say why the mortar round exploded?
That remained uncertain. The men closest to the detonation were killed instantly, so there were no direct witnesses to the exact moment.
Right.
The two main theories put forward were either that a round was accidentally dropped during the transfer,
Plausible, especially with lack of training.
or that gasoline vapors from those nearby drums ignited somehow, maybe sparked by static, or possibly even a dropped cigarette, even though smoking was banned, or perhaps welding sparks from maintenance happening nearby.
So accidental drop or ignition of fumes, but no definitive answer.
No definitive proof, just strong probabilities.
Did the inquiry look at how the crews reacted during the disaster? You mentioned some were quite inexperienced.
They did. They examined the actions of the crews. There was some criticism, that some sailors might have abandoned their ships too quickly. But the board also had to acknowledge the extreme conditions, the sheer terror, the heat, the explosions. It wasn't a normal situation by any stretch.
Hardly. So were there consequences for any individuals? Disciplinary actions?
Ultimately, no. Despite some of the concerns raised about crew actions, no formal disciplinary measures were taken against any personnel involved. The extreme circumstances were seen as the primary factor.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier this was kept quiet. Tell us more about that secrecy.
Yeah, this is a really significant part of the story. Immediately after the explosions, a strict press blackout was imposed. Total silence.
No news reports at all?
None. The official inquiry itself was classified top secret, and the survivors. They were explicitly ordered not to talk about it, not even in letters home.
Forbidden from discussing it now.
A few days later, the Navy released just a very brief, incredibly vague statement. It mentioned an explosion, some loss of life, and damage to several small vessels. That was it.
So minimal.
Utterly minimal. The full story, the details we're discussing now, they remained classified, hidden from the public, until 1960.
16 years.
16 years. And that long silence is why the West Loch disaster is often called Pearl Harbor's second disaster, because for so long, almost nobody knew it had even happened.
That's incredible. Given the scale of destruction, those 6 LSTs sunk. Others damaged. What was the impact on Operation Forager? Did it derail the invasion plan?
You'd think it would have had a massive impact, right?
Absolutely. Losing that many ships and so much equipment just before a major landing.
But here's what's truly astonishing. Operation Forager was delayed by only a single day.
1 day. How is that possible?
It really speaks volumes about the sheer scale and, frankly, the resilience of the Allied war machine at that point. They brought in reinforcements, repaired what could be fixed incredibly quickly. The logistical effort was just immense. They absorbed the blow and kept moving.
A testament to the industrial power and organization involved.
Definitely. But amidst all that efficiency and the tragedy, we shouldn't forget the individual acts of bravery.
Like the tugboat crew you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. And there's another significant one, boatswain's mate, second class Francis P. Hammerberg.
Okay.
He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions, not during the initial blasts, but during the dangerous salvage operations afterwards.
What did he do?
He was involved in the incredibly risky work of trying to recover bodies and material from the sunken wreckage. Tragically, he died in a cave-in while trying to tunnel underneath one of the submerged LSTs.
Oh, that's terrible. It shows the danger didn't end when the fires went out.
Not at all. The salvage was perilous work.
What happened to all the wreckage eventually? Is there anything left there today?
Over the years, most of it was salvaged and removed. West Loch was cleared. However, one piece was intentionally left.
What's that?
The bow section of LST-480. It had been beached during the disaster. It was left right there on the shore and still stands today. It's this kind of silent, rusting memorial to the event.
A physical reminder.
Yeah. And it took a long time, but in 1995, the first official plaque commemorating the disaster was finally put up nearby.
Took until 95.
Yeah. And later still, there were significant efforts using modern forensics to try and identify the remains of victims who had been buried as unknowns in the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, the Punch Bowl.
Bringing some closure, hopefully, after all that time.
Mm-hmm.
Did any good come out of this disaster? Any changes made?
Yes, thankfully. The West Loch disaster, along with a very similar terrible incident at Port Chicago in California just 2 months later.
Chicago, right. Another massive explosion involving ammunition.
Exactly. Those two events served as a huge, tragic wake-up call for the Navy regarding ordnance handling.
What kind of changes?
Major critical changes. A completely new focus on thorough, proper training for anyone handling explosives. Redesigning munitions to be inherently safer to handle. And crucially, a strict new rule against mooring ships packed so closely together, nesting them when loading or moving ammunition.
Those sound like vital safety improvements.
Absolutely vital. Procedures born from tragedy, but ones that undoubtedly save lives later on.
Now, you mentioned a twist. Something almost unbelievable.
Yes. This is a really fascinating side note, almost a historical mystery attached to West Loch.
Go on.
Well, there's persistent speculation, and some evidence to support it, that during the huge salvage operation clearing the wreckage from West Loch,
Yeah.
the U.S. Navy might have unknowingly recovered parts of the missing 5th Japanese Midget submarine from the original 1941 Pearl Harbor attack.
Wait, one of the Midget subs from December 7th, found in West Loch in 44.
Potentially. Here's the thing. Much later, pieces confirmed to be from a Japanese Midget sub were found dumped in a naval debris field south of Pearl Harbor, and that debris field is known to be where wreckage from West Loch was taken and dumped.
Whoa, so the theory is...
The theory is that this fifth Midget sub, unaccounted for after the 41 attack, might have somehow slipped into West Loch back then, maybe got stuck or was scuttled by its crew.
And just lay there undiscovered.
Exactly. Laying on the bottom, hidden until the massive explosions and subsequent dredging and salvage operation in 1944 scooped it up along with all the LST wreckage.
And then dumped it offshore without anyone realizing what it was at the time.
That's the intriguing possibility. It adds this whole other layer of historical mystery onto the West Loch story. An incredible what if.
That is truly fascinating, an unexpected connection across years of the war.
Isn't it just?
Wow. Well, if you out there are finding these kinds of hidden stories, these deep dives into the past, as gripping as we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now.
Yeah, definitely subscribe.
That way you won't miss any of our future explorations into these fascinating, often untold corners of history right here on Tell Me More.
So wrapping up on West Loch, it really stands as this powerful yet often overlooked reminder of the immense costs and the hidden dangers of war, even far away from the front lines.
Right. It wasn't combat, but it was absolutely devastating.
You had the rapid wartime expansion, the immense pressure of preparing for huge operations like Forager, and just the inherent risks of handling massive amounts of fuel and explosives all concentrated together.
A perfect storm almost.
In a tragic way, yes. It all converged that Sunday afternoon.
And the secrecy aspect.
Yeah.
That's also a major takeaway, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The fact that an event of this magnitude could be effectively erased from public knowledge for so long really makes you think about wartime information control.
How it shapes what we know or what we don't know about the past.
Exactly. It highlights how complex that control can be and how it can leave these significant gaps in our collective memory.
And it really prompts the question, doesn't it? How many other significant events, maybe not on this scale, but important moments, how many remain lesser known?
Still waiting in the archives or in unpublished accounts waiting to be fully uncovered.
The West Loch story, tragic as it is such a powerful example of why digging into these less publicized moments is so important.
Yeah.
We have to remember and learn from them, too.
Absolutely. And it leaves you wondering what other secrets might still be buried, literally or figuratively, beneath the surface of major historical events we think we know so well.
That's a really provocative thought to end on. What else is out there?
Keeps us looking, right?
It certainly does. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the West Loch disaster.
My pleasure. It's an important story to tell.
Indeed it is. Until our next exploration here on Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast, keep exploring the stories that continue to shape our world.